We're going to take a look at what are called vectors, and this is a basic introduction. We can use vectors to represent lots of things. So what does a vector do? A vector represents a number applied in a direction. Okay, so this is very, very vague. And it's meant to be that way. Vectors can represent lots of things. So a vector represents a number applied in a direction. So the number here is usually called the magnitude. So here's some examples of vectors. Number one, a speed applied in a direction. For example, 25 miles per hour. That is not a vector by itself because that's not very specific. That's just a number, right? 25 is just a number. But then if we say in the direction south 25 degrees west, sorry, don't use 25 again, I had that stuck in my head for some reason, south 70 degrees west, now that is a vector. Okay? So we have a speed applied in a certain direction. Specifically, this is called a velocity vector. A velocity has a speed applied in a direction. Some areas call velocity and speed the same thing. We will specifically be talking about velocities as vectors. In other words, a speed, but also applied in a given direction. Okay, another one is let's say a weight applied in a direction. So you could apply 175 pounds in a direction of south. So that could be a vector. That is called a force vector. And I believe there are other ways to represent forces besides weight, but in general, this is called a force vector. Okay? So that's a weight applied in a direction. Those are examples of vectors. So another way to represent a vector, which is very common, is to use an arrow, a ray, if you will. So for example, we could represent this velocity vector here, number one. If we draw the direction of south 70 degrees west and make an arrow out of that, then this could represent the vector. Now how do we do that? This of course would be 70 degrees if you know your bearings. And to represent the 25, we would just say that this vector has a length of 25. So the number for a vector, the magnitude, corresponds directly to the length of this arrow. So this is the magnitude. So specifically in a velocity vector, the speed is the magnitude. For a velocity vector specifically. More than likely we'll look at some applications of velocity vectors later, so that'll be important to know. Okay, similarly over here, weight of 175 pounds in a direction of south would be a vector or an arrow or vector that points directly downward, and we would say the length of this vector, I bet you can guess, would be 175. So the magnitude of this force vector is 175, and the direction of this force vector is south. The units, pounds or miles per hour, you would have to get those from a context of some sort. You know, if you're working in some sort of application problem, you'd have to know what unit goes on the number or the magnitude for the vector. So that's what vectors are. anything you could think of where you could apply a number in a given direction, you could represent as a vector. In other videos, we will see how to mathematically work with vectors and how to write them, besides drawing this picture of what they are.